You're going to be the first Supreme Court nominee in more than 50 years who served as a federal trial court judge, the first in 50 years to have served as both a federal trial court and a federal appellate court judge. Let me ask you the obvious one. What are the qualities that a judge should possess? I mean, you've had time on both the trial court and the appellate court. What qualities should a judge have, and how does that experience you've had, how does that shape your approach to being on the bench?
Senator Leahy, yesterday many of the senators emphasized that the values they thought were important for judging. And central to many of their comments was the fact that a judge had to come to the process understanding the importance and respect the Constitution must receive in the judging process, and an understanding that that respect is guided by and should be guided by a full appreciation of the limited jurisdiction of the court in our system of government, but understanding its importance as well. That is the central part of judging. What my experiences on the trial court and the appellate court have reinforced for me is that the process of judging is a process of keeping an open mind. It's the process of not coming to a decision with a prejudgment ever of an outcome, and that reaching a conclusion has to start with understanding what the parties are arguing, but examining in all situations carefully the facts as they prove them or not prove them, the record as they create it, and then making a decision that is limited to what the law says on the facts before the judge.
So tell us, you've heard all these charges and countercharges, the why is Latina and on and on. Here's your chance. You tell us what's going on here, Judge.
The context of the words that I spoke have created a misunderstanding, and misunderstanding, and to give everyone assurances, I want to state up front, unequivocally and without doubt, I do not believe that any ethnic, racial, or gender group has an advantage in sound judging. I do believe that every person has an equal opportunity to be a good and wise judge regardless of their background or life experiences. What the words that I used agreeing with the sentiment that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor was attempting to convey. I understood that sentiment to be what I just spoke about, which is that both men and women were equally capable of being wise and fair judges.
Judge, we've heard several of our colleagues now, particularly on the other side, criticize you because they believe some things that you've said in speeches show that you'll not be able to put your personal views aside. But I believe rather than pulling lines out of speeches, oftentimes out of context, the better way is to examine your record as a judge. In fact, when I asked now Justice Alito what sort of a justice he was going to make, he said, quote, "If you want to know what sort of justice I would make, look at what sort of judge I've been."
I believe what my record shows is that I follow the law, and that my small reversal rate vis-a-vis the vast body of cases that I have examined, because you've mentioned only the opinions I've authored, but I've been a participant in thousands more that have not been either reviewed by the Supreme Court or reversed.
We've heard as much recently about Chief Justice Roberts' view that judges are like umpires simply calling balls and strikes. So finally, would you like to take the opportunity to give us your view about this sort of an analogy?
Few judges could claim they love baseball more than I do, for obvious reasons. But analogies are always imperfect. And I prefer to describe what judges do, like umpires, is to be impartial and bring an open mind to every case before them. And by an open mind, I mean a judge who looks at the facts of each case, listens and understands the arguments of the parties, and applies the law as the law commands. It's a refrain I keep repeating because that is my philosophy of judging, applying the law to the facts at hand. And that's my description of judging.
I'm puzzled why Mr. Estrada keeps coming up. Mr. Estrada had no judicial experience. The nominee before us has considerable judicial experience. Mr. Estrada wouldn't answer questions presented to him. This nominee, I think, has been very straightforward. She has not used catchy phrases. She has answered the questions directly, the best she could, and to me, that gets points. I must say that if there's a test for judicial temperament, you pass it with an A++. I want you to know that, because I wanted to respond, and my adrenaline was moving along, and you have just sat there very quietly and responded to questions that in their very nature are quite provocative. So I want to congratulate you about that.
The wartime Supreme Court decisions like Korematsu that we look back at with some bewilderment, of course, Korematsu versus the United States decision in which the Supreme Court upheld the government policy to round up and detain more than 100,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. It seems inconceivable that the U.S. government would have decided to put huge numbers of citizens in detention centers based on their race, and that the Supreme Court allowed that to happen. I asked Chief Justice Roberts about this. I'll ask you as well. Do you believe that Korematsu was wrongly decided?
Was, sir.
Does a judge have a duty to resist the kind of wartime fears that people understandably felt during World War II, which likely played a role in the 1944 Korematsu decision?
A judge should never rule from fear. A judge should rule from law and the Constitution. It is inconceivable to me today that a decision permitting the detention, arrest of an individual solely on the basis of their race would be considered appropriate by our government.
Now, some of the great justices in the history of our country were involved in that decision. How does a judge resist those kind of fears?
One hopes by having the wisdom of a Harlan and Plessy, by having the wisdom to understand always, no matter what the situation, that our Constitution has held us in good stead for over 200 years, and that our survival depends on upholding it.